All right, folks. All right. So we are going to be going through not all Unit 3 and 4. In fact, it's predominantly going to be Unit 4. So we're looking at the period between 1450 and 1750. Okay? 1450 to 1750. We're not really going to be doing the Islamic empires. Okay? The gunpowder empires. And the reason why is because we'd be here forever. So we're going to focus on mostly like age of exploration, European history kind of stuff. And then we're going to come back to the empires, the Islamic empires on Tuesday, I believe. Okay? But I'll let everybody know how that's going to work. Now, again, I'm going to tell you guys what I told my classes today. At this point in time, this stuff is great, right? Big picture, that's what you want to know. That's the history that you have to focus on. But I want to remind you guys that at this point, you need to be drinking my water. At this point, you need to be practicing for this exam. The way that you're going to do best on this exam is the more comfortable you are with the assessments itself. So that means you should be doing those progress checks. That means you should be taking those multiple choice practice tests. That's what you should be doing. Besides your graphic organizers and your review packets that we've assigned you, that stuff is what's going to get you through this exam. You've basically been taught by Ms. Krasner and I mean, there's stuff missing, right? There's chunks of stuff that are missing, unfortunately, but we can't, you guys see how long we've been working on this. Like somebody brought up, like Dave brought up the Mexican Revolution today.
Bro,
Yes.
We can see that.
We did not.
Oh,
Shut up. And I want you guys to understand is when you get to the exam, there's going to be topics on there that you have not learned. Because this is a test about your historical thinking skills, right? We've heard that a number of times this year. So what I explained to like Dave today in class was that let's say you get a DBQ on a topic that you've never heard of before, which there's a decent chance that'll happen. That doesn't mean that you've lost the ability to do the skills that you've been taught all year. You can do the context, you can do the thesis, you can do the documents, and you can do sourcing. There's no reason why you can't do that stuff. So understand that you have the ability to do it. You might not get a 7 out of 7, but who the heck is getting a 7 out of 7 anyway? So you might not be able to do the outside evidence, but you can do the rest of it just by basing it on documents. So everybody take a deep breath if you encounter something on the exam that you hadn't seen before. Not that. Okay, so Unit 3 and 4. So the big ideas here. So these are the things that we're going to be discussing today, with the exception of the last couple of bullets. We're going to be discussing the plague and the Crusades, Italian Renaissance, the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople, new monarchs, age of exploration, trade post-empire, joint stock companies, the encounter of Columbian Exchange, conquest of the Americas and Spanish colonialism, Atlantic slave trade, Middle Passage, Protestant Reformation, age of absolutism, and early industrial Europe. So, yeah, it's a lot, and I'm going to be going over this in broad strokes. So I'm not going to be going into any detail about anything specifically, but that's because I want you to know by time period. One of the ways that we're going to be reviewing next week with you is we're going to be giving you at the beginning of the period a list of different topics and names and events and stuff like that, and we're going to give you a chart, and you got to figure out where they fit in time period. Right? That's a good, because it's more important for you to know the sequential order of things than the itty-bitty details. When do they happen? What caused what is going to be more important. Okay? All right, let's get started. So, what we're going to do in the first few bullets here is I'm going to set you up for the age of exploration. That's the point of this, right? If you had to write a DBQ or an LEQ on the age of exploration, you can contextualize it. On Tuesday we did 1200 to 1450, where we talked about all those trading, trade routes and different civilizations that were set up. And as we were leaving, I was like, all right, now this is kind of setting us up for the age of exploration in Europe coming out of the Dark Ages. So let's look at this. So the first thing I want you guys to see here, and I'm kind of going a little bit out of order, is that with those trade routes expanding in Asia and the Silk Roads becoming safer because of the Mongols, it's going to cause an extension between Europe and Asia, right? And the way that we kind of talked about this is that because those trade routes are open, more goods from Asia, whether it be by the Indian Ocean Trade Network, through China, through the Middle East, they're all going to get to the Middle East, right? And those resources and those maybe they're even thoughts or worldliness or goods are going to make their way into Europe. So I want you to remember that first, okay? Those things by way of the Crusades are going to make their way into Europe, which is going to cause the Europeans to start thinking and kind of coming out of the dark ages, right? Start having thoughts about the way the rest of the world works instead of relying on what the church is telling them. Okay. With that, and with those exchanges, one of the things that's going to come to Europe is the plague. Okay? Now, everybody loves the details about the plague, all the people that died, and all that kind of crap. Okay. For our purposes here, it's how does the plague get to Europe, and then what is the impact on Europe? So first of all, obviously the plague is going to come from China, and it's going to come to Europe by way of trade. It is evidence that trade is opening up in Europe. Okay? The plague is not a blip, guys. It lasts for a very long period of time. You're talking about the 1400s, where you're going to have the plague that's going to be coming into Europe. Now, the impact of the plague is going to be very important. And the reason why the impact of the plague is going to be important is because it's going to kind of mess up European society. Okay? And this is going to be important later on. When the plague comes into Europe, there's a few things that are going to happen. One, you're going to have real economic disruption in Europe, right? Because of the amount of people that are dying and because of the disruption to the merchant cities, it's going to kind of mess up the social hierarchy and the workings of Europe. And specifically, it's going to cause a lot of job opportunities for those people that were involved in feudalism, right? A lot of those lords and a lot of those nobles are going to lose control over their feudal lands, over their manors. And those people are now going to be looking for other jobs. So there's two things here I want to just kind of reinforce. One, the plague is going to help to bring an end to feudalism in Western Europe, right? That was that political force that was so strong in Europe. And it's going to disrupt that social hierarchy that exists. The other thing that it's going to do also is that it's going to cause people to not become less religious, but become skeptical of the power of the church. When the church cannot control or cannot help people when they get the plague, people are like, wait, hold up, this doesn't seem to be right. So one of the things that I want you to notice is that one, the plague is going to help to kind of bring an end to feudalism, and it's also going to disrupt the Catholic Church or the Christian Church at this point. Does everybody got that? It's going to cause people to be skeptical. The other nail in the coffin with the feudalism deals with the Crusades. Okay? The Crusades are also going to bring an end to feudalism in the sense that lords or nobles are going to be sent down, a lot of people are going to be sent down to the Middle East to fight for the Holy Land. Okay? When they do that, a lot of them don't come back because they die. And as a result of that, the manors kind of get all messed up. Okay? And again, that is like another thing that's going to help feudalism kind of come to an end in Europe. All right? On a side note, one of the other things that comes about during this time is that you do have evidence of anti-Semitism in Europe, something you might want to just kind of be aware of, where they begin to blame like the Jews on the plague, the plague on the Jews, because the Jews are kind of looked at as a scapegoat for it. Just keep that in your back pocket a little bit, that during the plague we do see a rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. Okay? That's prejudice against Jews. All right. So now we have this situation set up. We have Europeans now seeing what's going on in the outside world. We see feudalism kind of coming to an end. We see goods coming into Europe by way of trade from the Middle East and the Crusades. And we're seeing all this, and that's going to result in what's called the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance. Okay? Renaissance just means reawakening. Okay? Renaissance means reawakening. And it's a reawakening of European culture. So where Europe had been sitting in the Dark Ages for centuries, they are now, because of their exposure to the rest of the world, are now like, whoa, there's a lot of stuff that we can learn about. And this is where they developed the notion of humanism, right? When we talk about the Renaissance, we are talking about humanism. Humanism is a way of learning. You're no longer just learning what the church is saying. You're now learning about you're learning about science. You're learning about math. You're learning about history. You're learning about language. You're learning about all of those things. You are no longer just taking the church for what it says. You are now instead becoming more and more skeptical of the world, and you're becoming smarter, right? You're learning the humanities, right? Humanism, humanities, right? That's like, English history, all that kind of stuff. So now you have people in Europe who are now becoming more intelligent, who are becoming more worldly, who are learning about the outside world. You have the decline or the beginning of the decline of the Christian church. You have feudalism breaking down. You have all of those things happening, which is leaving in Europe this kind of vacuum of leadership. And that vacuum of leadership is going to be filled by what's called the new monarchs. Okay? New monarchs are the beginning of centralization of authority within Europe. Okay, and that's common during the 1400s. The new monarchs are the centralization of authority in Europe during the 1400s. Really, 14 and 1500s is the new monarchs. The best example that we can give of the new monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, right? If you're looking at an example of Europe during this time, we are looking at the new monarchs and what they're essentially doing. All right. What they're essentially doing is they're filling that void where the manners were, and they are now centralizing their authority. This is the beginning of the absolutists, right? This is going to set a tone for centralized government in Europe. Okay. So now we got all this, right? So now we got this whole thing going on. We got the plague coming into Europe that's disrupting feudalism. You have the rise of the new monarchs who are centralizing their authority in Europe by controlling that old nobility. You're seeing the Crusades and all of these new ideas coming in. All of this stuff is happening at the beginning of this time period, right? Has everybody got that? Well, I don't want to ask questions because that would be really annoying. But that's kind of where we're at. All right. All of that stuff is going to help us cause what's called the Age of Exploration, because this is the thing that I want you to remember, and I'm gonna kind of explain this a little bit better. While this is happening, the gunpowder empires are rising in the Middle East. So just as the Europeans are like, yo, those spices and that porcelain from Asia and all of that stuff's coming from Asia, we want it. We want it bad. It's like, I always describe it to my students that it's like a drug. They just want it. It's now going to be cut off because in 1453, there's a date that you're going to know. There's a couple of dates in this class that are important enough. When in 1453, when the Ottomans conquered Constantinople, that causes a major problem because now the Europeans are not going to have direct access to all that good stuff. Right? All right, settle down. That good stuff. You're being recorded. All that good stuff. All that stuff from the Indian Ocean that we talked about before. All that porcelain, all those luxury items, they don't have access to it anymore. So now if we do this whole thing, right? Now we put it all together. You have an interest in Asia because of the Crusades. You have a reawakening of thought and education because of the Renaissance. You have a breakdown of feudalism in Europe. You have people beginning to question the church. And you have new monarchs who are now centralizing their authority and now need wealth in order to do so. And the only way that they're going to do that is by expanding outside of Europe. So what begins to happen during the middle of the 1400s, as a result of all of this stuff, right? The Ottomans conquering Constantinople, that curiosity about the world, that wanting to make money, all of those things are going to result in that thing called the Age of Exploration. Okay? Right? Because think about what the Age of Exploration is. The Age of Exploration is caused by a want for spices, gold, luxury items, right, from Asia. The Age of Exploration is caused by a curiosity to see what's going on in the world, to see what's happening out there, that curiosity about science and those things. The Age of Exploration is caused by these advances in new innovation that were acquired from the Middle East and Asia. That's all part of this. And the Age of Exploration was spurred by monarchs who needed a way to gain wealth so that they can consolidate their authority by building armies. Okay? And again, that's Ferdinand Isabella. Right? That's the best example. Okay? And so that's why in the middle of the 1400s, the Europeans start going around and exploring the globe. Because it's that old thing where they are trying to find the fastest route to Asia because they can no longer cut through the Middle East. They got to go around to get there because now the Ottomans are in the way. Okay? When we talk about the Age of Exploration, some of the innovations you need to know. You need to know, and these are innovations, right, that the Europeans are not creating, right? These are things that they're learning from Asia, from the Middle East. So items like the astrolabe are going to be important. The caravel, which is a much wider ship. The astrolabe, everybody loves the astrolabe. The lateen sails, the magnetic compass. It's important that you know those innovations, but know that most of them were not European, right? They were things that were taken from the rest of the world. So, when we changed the curriculum for this course, I'm part of it. When the College Board changed the curriculum for this course, that's what a lot of people had trouble with because it becomes like a European course when most of those innovations that the Europeans get in order to expand, they actually get them from places like Asia, right? So those innovations are going to help the Europeans to kind of travel the globe and do things. The things that you need to know about the Age of Exploration is I would know a couple of explorers, but don't go crazy memorizing them, right? Just be able to reference them. Henry the Navigator is like the first one out. He's Portuguese, and the Portuguese are going to be the first ones out, and they're going to start like exploring the west coast of Africa. And then, we have guys like Magellan who are going to eventually make it around the globe and stuff like that, all with interest getting to the Indian Ocean trade. Okay? Again, the Europeans are using maritime-based exploration, right? Maritime-based. And much of their trade routes. Mr. Russo, you don't want to do this? I'm all right. You good? Okay. Maritime-based. They're going to be maritime-based trade routes, right? Maritime-based exploration.
Artex.
Yeah. And that's essentially, now, the Age of Exploration is going to go on, right? Remember I told you, 1453, important date. That forces the Europeans to find a new way around. That period of time is going to be the Europeans exploring, trying to find the fastest trade route to the Indian Ocean. Okay? 1453. Right? How are you typing like that? That's so weird.
Sorry,
You could have gotten a chair. All right. So now the Europeans arrive in the Indian Ocean. And remember that when they arrive in the Indian Ocean Trade Network, we're looking at the trading post empires and the joint stock companies. Remember, the first ones to make it to the Indian Ocean Trade Network are going to be the Portuguese. Now, this is an important trend, right? Remember, big idea. Once the Europeans go there, they're replacing the Muslims, right? So whereas Islamic merchants dominated the Indian Ocean Trade Network between 1200 and 1450, after 1450, it's going to be Europeans that are going to begin to dominate the Indian Ocean Trade Network. That's important to remember. So after 1450, we're looking at the Europeans. That's a change, right? That's a major change where the Europeans are going to be dominating the Indian Ocean trade now. Okay? So Portuguese is going to be the first one out there. They're going to set up what's known as trading post empires. Trading post empires are essentially, they're not taking over any place. What they're doing is they're basically, it's almost like charging a toll, right? As merchants are sailing around, they're going to have to pay the Portuguese for whatever they're transporting around. So they're not necessarily taking over areas. They're setting up trading posts to kind of establish things. The Portuguese do not last very long at all, okay? And the reason why is because they're so small and their military is very weak. So the next group that's going to really come in is going to be the English and the Dutch. Now, this is important. The Portuguese are all about the monarch, right? They're going out there because of their new monarch. The British and the Dutch, we're talking about joint stock companies, right? British and Dutch are joint stock companies. And where the Portuguese, and we'll get to the Spanish in a second, are always looking to spread Catholicism and they want to spread Christianity. Remember, the Dutch and the British are all about making the money, right? They're more about making money and accruing wealth. So we're going to go in the Indian Ocean Trade Network from the Portuguese who set up the trading post empires to the British and the Dutch who are going to set up joint stock companies. Now, joint stock companies are companies that are sponsored by the government but are privately owned. What that essentially means is that, like Tristan has money, he's going to invest in exploration. And that company is then going to go out and explore and bring back money for him. Right? It's very capitalistic, which we're going to get to in a minute. The two joint stock companies you need to know are the British East India Company, which we've talked about at nauseam, right? When we talked about India, and also the VOC with the Dutch. Okay, that's the United East India Company. The English East India Company is obviously going to be the big one, and the VOC, just kind of be aware of it. But know that the joint stock companies are going to go there. And they're not formed really until around 1600. But I want you to kind of know that, you know, we look at 100 years worth of history as like this big block, but in the field of history, it's really not that long. So during the 1500s, it's still going to be dominated by the Portuguese, but then eventually they're going to be replaced by the Dutch and the British. Okay? And remember, again, common theme is that we're going to see a change in the Indian Ocean Trade Network from dominated by Muslim merchants to being dominated by European merchants. All right? And that's going to mess everything up. Okay. Now, the Spanish go the other way, right? The Spanish are going to go towards the Americas. And that's where the next date that you need to know. 1492 is a big one, right? It's kind of cliche. 1492 is the encounter. Okay, that's the meeting of the new and the old worlds. We all looked at this painting in class, and we know what this is. This is Christopher Columbus arriving in the Caribbean and his encounter with the natives. And we know what happens as a result of that. The native population is eventually going to be killed. The natives, by the way, in the Caribbean are known as the Taino. Taino. And they're eventually going to be wiped out during the very early stages of Columbus's conquest. Okay? So the encounter is just the meeting of the old world and new world. So the world is now getting bigger, right? Now you have Latin America involved in things. You have stuff from there. From the encounter, we know we have the next thing is the Columbian Exchange. Now remember that when we say the Columbian Exchange, we are not talking about a trade. This is a biological and, it's crops and food going back between the New World and the Old World. Okay? So whenever we're talking about the Columbian Exchange, it is that an exchange, it's a natural exchange of things from the Old World to the New World and from the New World to the Old World. Okay? You guys you're going to have access to all these slides, so don't worry about copying those slides. So the big thing, obviously, is that when this Columbian Exchange is going on, the biggest thing that's really coming from the old world to the new world is going to be disease. And those diseases, specifically smallpox, are going to help to kill a large percentage of the population in Latin America, especially in the Caribbean, right? Because that's the first place it's going to hit. So like things like influenza and smallpox are going to come in and it's going to destroy the people of the new world. All right. Other things that are going to come over from the old world to the new world. A lot of things with beast of burden. So, you know, horses, cows are going to come over, cattle. You're going to have pigs that are going to come over. Bananas are going to come over from Africa. So a lot of food stuff plus disease is going to come over to the new world. But what goes back to the old world is very, very important. You're going to have like things like potatoes that are going to go over. Not so much in animals, but potatoes, cocoa, pineapples, nobody cares, pumpkins, all those things, tomatoes, tobacco. They're all going to go from the old world, the new world to the old world. Now, this is the big thing that you need to know about the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange is going to result in a population explosion around the globe. Now, in the Americas, obviously the Native American population is going to die off because of disease. But eventually, when they start eating new crops, just like they do in Africa and Europe, where they start eating new crops that are coming from the New World, the population is going to increase. That is important to remember. Places like China are going to see a population increase. Places like Africa are going to see a population increase because of the new foods that are coming in. So we got disease that's killing off many of the Native Americans, and you're having food that's going back here. And that's going to change everything, right? Population is going to go up in places like Europe and Africa. That's going to change a lot of things that we're going to look at in a few minutes. Okay? So this is the Columbian Exchange. And again, remember, it's kind of like an involuntary exchange of things. Like, it's when two groups meet each other for the first time, they exchange things. And in this case, you know, animals are going to be brought over, disease, food, stuff like that. The Columbian Exchange goes on for like 200 years, by the way. This is not something that just is like here are some pigs. That's not how it works. So you're looking at like 1500s to 1600s is really the Columbian Exchange. It goes on for a very, very long time. All right. Now, from there, what's next? We have the conquest of the Latin Americas. That's terrible. Okay, so we got the conquest of the Americas. All right. So we're going to talk about Latin America first. We use the term conquest of Latin America because that's exactly what happens. Just like we said, this is not a joint stock company thing. This is the Spanish who are coming to Latin America. Okay? The Spanish and the Portuguese. And they're doing it to conquer. Right? They're coming in. If you guys remember when we looked at it a long time ago, you know, they're coming in on horses, looking like knights with swords up, ready to kill mad people. So they are going to come in and conquer the Americas. That's an important thing to remember. The Spanish are going to conquer Mexico and Peru. So Mexico, you're looking at the destruction of the Aztecs. Peru, you're looking at the destruction of the Incas. Now remember, why are they able to win these battles? Okay? With the Aztecs, with both of these, obviously the Europeans have advanced technology. Okay? They have advanced weaponry that the natives in the Americas haven't seen. But they also have horses, and they have disease, and they have all of these things that they have an advantage over the indigenous people of the Americas. So when they come in and conquer, they're going to be able to do it with relative ease. And they're going to be able to kind of go in and take over those regions. So what we see in the early part of the 1500s is conquistadors like Pizarro and Cortez that are going to come in and they're going to conquer the people of Latin America. Okay? And that's going to result in a lot. Now, some people are like, well, why is it that disease is going to affect the people of the Americas so much, and it's not going to affect the people of Europe as much. The Europeans actually have they have a greater immune system. Because if you think about it, they just dealt with the plague. And they dealt with all those diseases that have spread around the Eastern Hemisphere. In the Americas, if you remember from Tuesday, earlier in the year, the people in the Americas were very isolated from everybody. So their bodies were not used to those kinds of diseases. So when the Europeans come over, they're going to be able to kind of do what they want. So we see the conquest of the Americas, specifically Latin America. It is going to be a conquest. In North America, it is different. Okay? In the conquest of North America, it is a very different experience. Now, there's a few reasons why. In North America, the reason why they're going to North America is a little different, right? In South America, you have the Spanish king and queen who are pushing for this, right? They want to accrue wealth. They want to make money. They want to spread Christianity. That's all on them. They want to do this. When we talk about the North Americans, right? Well, not North America. When the Northern Europeans go to North America, we're talking about the English, the Dutch, and a little bit of French, right? The French go to Canada. When they come here, they're coming here not to go and conquer. They're coming to start over, right? Many of them are escaping religious persecution back in England. Many of them are looking for a new start to their lives. Many of them are looking for new experiences, new opportunities. They're looking for economic opportunities. And when they come, where Latin America was controlled by these giant empires like the Aztecs and the Incas, in North America, it's scattered tribes, right? So there's no unified kingdom that they have to fight against. So instead, it's one of those things where it's kind of like they just show up and they're just trying to figure stuff out. So you can see from these two paintings, right? The one on the left, you can see you have, they're meeting with the Native Americans. It's not a volatile situation. This is like they're meeting and talking and they're exchanging things. And on the right, you can see here, and we looked at this in class, in Jamestown, they built a fort because they want to be protected from the Native Americans. So whereas in Latin America, you're looking at conquest, in North America, you're looking at basically settlement, right? We're settling there, all right? And we're going to get to the administration now. So in Spanish colonialism in Latin America, this is something very important that you need to know, okay? 2 things you need to know, or 3 things, a whole bunch of things. In Latin America, you have to remember that it is a region that is going to be controlled by the Spanish and Portuguese crowns. So that means it is directly controlled by the king or queen from those areas, right? And remember, that's where they talk about viceroys, not viceroys, viceroys. Viceroys. Those are representatives of the king who come in and represent what the king's interests are, right? So you have these viceroys. So viceroys are representatives of the king. They are there to administer. Okay. We learned a little bit in class about the audiencias. The audiencias were sent over by the king as well to keep an eye on what was happening with the viceroys. So Latin America is going to be directly controlled by the Spanish politically. Centralized empire, we're going to control it. In Latin America, there is a strict social hierarchy that exists. On the top of that social hierarchy, you have the Peninsulares. Peninsulares are those that are born in Europe who have traveled over to the Americas. Then you got the Creoles. The Creoles are people born in born in Latin America of European descent. And then you can see mestizos or mixed Native Americans and slaves. Okay? Strict social hierarchy. Obviously, the closer you are to living in Europe, the more authority you have. These people, the Creoles, going to put a note down now, these are the people that are eventually going to lead the Latin American revolutions in the early part of the 1800s. All right. In terms of economics, the system that we're looking at is mercantilism. Okay? The economic system in Latin America is going to be mercantilism. That means that everything that is everything that is in Latin America is going to benefit the mother country. Okay, we're looking at a mercantilist system. Okay, we're going to see that again when we talk about England. All right, England. When we talk about India, eventually. So when we look at this, we know that there's a mercantilist system, and we know there's a strict social hierarchy, and we know that politically, how it's going to be kind of controlled by the Spanish government. Now, I don't have slides on this, but we do need to talk about it. All right, in Latin America, and this is a continuity throughout really its entire history, you have coerced labor. Okay, that's the vocabulary word that they like to use on the AP exam. The term coerced labor. Now, there's a couple of different systems that I want you to be aware of. So remember, the big thing that there's two elements of Latin American economy, right? Spanish economy in Latin America. One is going to be agrarian, and that's going to be the sugar plantations. Okay? And in that system, if you guys remember, we had the encomienda system, right? The encomienda system was that system that was set up that was so harsh to the native peoples working in on those sugar plantations. The encomienda system we saw most commonly used in the Caribbean. And if you guys remember, that was a system where land was given to the church, and the whole idea was that the church was then going to teach the natives like how to be civilized and how to be Christian and how to be good people and blah 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 blah. And good luck. There's an empty chair for you. And all right. What was it saying? Oh, encomienda system. So it was an exchange, right? So what was supposed to happen? Be careful because that chair's broken. The church was supposed to now help out the natives. Does that make sense? And it was supposed to treat them right, but of course the natives are being treated like crap. All right? And that's kind of, that ends up being one of those things that kind of destroys the native population. In Brazil, they have the Engenho system or Engenho system. Okay? That's the sugar mills that were created in Brazil. That's also native labor. Okay? So those are two forms of labor systems that you're seeing there. Yeah. What's it? Brazil was the sugar mills. That was the Engenho system. E-N-G-E-N-H-O. Yeah, that's it. Or Engenho. I speak Spanish. No hablo español. So you have the Engenho system and you have the sugar mills, and in the Caribbean you have the encomienda system. Both are examples of coerced labor. In the western part of Latin America, where Peru is, you're looking at the silver mines. What's the matter? Doesn't The silver mines, you talk about the Midas system, that is another form of coerced labor. When you're talking about the silver mines in Peru, you're talking about the city of Potosi. Right? Potosi was where that great mountain was that was like full of silver. But remember how abusive the Midas system was, right? Total abusive, coerced labor of the natives. It was the same system that was used by the Incas, but the Spanish were much worse with it, of course. Okay? So the Incas used that system, and then the Spanish are going to use it within the silver mines. So on the west coast of west coast of Latin America, you have that system. Okay? You have the Midas system, and that's the silver mine. You're also, I believe, going to see that a little bit in Mexico as well, which I know is a little bit weird, because they do a little silver mining there. That silver that is going to be taken out of the mountains in the west coast of Latin America is going to eventually make it to the Philippines by way of what's called the Spanish galleons. Okay? And the silver trade is going to become super important. Okay? The silver trade, and we're not going to get to that today, but the silver trade is going to be very important because it's totally going to mess up the Chinese economy. Okay. What's wrong?
You're just excited about the Midas system.
Wait, you didn't know Chinese.
Right.
This is stuff that we've learned. This is not nothing is new, right?
No. Yeah, inflation. Oh, Germany.
All right, in North America, go back to North America. North America had a different form of labor. In North America, they had what's called indentured servants. Indentured servitude. Okay? The way that indentured servitude worked was that you basically would travel to the New World and you would have to pay off your travel when you get there by working for 7 years. So the first labor that they had in North America was actually Europeans. They do not use the natives as labor in North America. North America does not use natives for labor. Natives for labor are going to be in South America, right? And in the Caribbean, not in North America. And the dominant crop, obviously, in North America is going to be tobacco. But it's going to be indentured servitude. So you're going to have Europeans basically paying off a debt. All right. The last part of this before I get into the Atlantic slave trade is religion, okay? We did a DBQ on this a long time ago. In terms of religion, Latin America is always going to be Catholicism. And we're going to get to the Protestant Reformation in a minute. But remember that the Europeans, the Spanish, are going to come over in an attempt to convert people to Catholicism. Okay? In an attempt to convert people to Catholicism. But the result of it, in most cases, was an element of syncretic faith. Right? Where you see a mixing of either Catholicism and indigenous beliefs. What's up? Indigenous beliefs. Or eventually you're going to see African and Catholicism and indigenous beliefs kind of blend together. But in Latin America, you're going to see people convert to Catholicism, but then you're also going to see syncretic faith development. Right? Again, we looked at that DBQ. And a good example to talk about in terms of syncretism in Latin America is the Virgin of Guadalupe in Mexico, right? The Virgin of Guadalupe. We watched the whole video on it. Virgin of Guadalupe is a representative of Catholicism in Mexico, bless you. She becomes like the patron saint of Mexico. But she also represents a lot of cultural things within Mexico itself, especially its commitment to agricultural production. Right? She's often seen surrounded by crops, and she's everywhere, right? Anybody who's ever been to Mexico, the Virgin of Guadalupe is everywhere in Mexico. Okay? There she is. That was weird. Okay. I see her right now. All right. So Virgin of Guadalupe represents syncretism, and so we see the spread of Catholicism. Now in North America, you're not really seeing the spread of religion there, because in North America they're Protestants. And we're gonna go through the Protestant Reformation in a minute. But in North America, they are Protestants who are going there. They're not really interested in spreading their religion. That's not what they're about. They're about starting over, starting a new life. So the nature of colonialism is very different if it's going to be Dutch or if it's going to be English or if it's going to be Spanish. The Spanish and Portuguese are going to push religion, whereas the Dutch and the English are not. That's also why, if you want to just put this in there, that's why looking to the future, when we talk about the Japanese, they allow Dutch traders in during the isolation because they're not trying to push their religion on them. Whereas the Portuguese were always trying to push religion. Okay, so now we know what's going on in Latin America, but we know what happens next, right? The native population begins to die off. Yes, because of all the overwork. And that leads to the Atlantic slave trade. Okay, so the next form of course labor that's going to happen in Latin America and in North America is the Atlantic slave trade. This is an important idea here. So what ends up happening is to replace those natives, you now have Africans that are going to be taken from their land to the Americas, okay, to work on the sugar plantations, whether it be in the sugar mills in Brazil or in the Caribbean or the tobacco farms in North America. But slaves, Africans, are going to be used to replace them. When they come, they're going to bring over their culture. They're going to bring over their ideas. So in the Caribbean, there's going to be elements of syncretic faith there as well. They mentioned voodoo, right? That's something that I've seen a couple of times on AP exams. The idea that they're bringing over cultural elements from Africa over to the New World. All right. They're also going to, obviously we can talk about the Middle Passage, the abuses on it and everything else. What they do like to talk about, and I've seen this a few times, is that there is African culture that comes to the Americas with the Africans. This, by the way, is also known as the African diaspora. So let's make sure that we know that. African diaspora, not diaspora. Diaspora. Okay? That's the movement of Africans all out of Africa. Now, a couple of things you got to make sure you know. We talked about this before. With majority of people that take from Africa are obviously males, young males. The disruption to the African economy and their way of life is tremendous. Couple of things that I want to make sure that you're aware of. One, the gender disparity that you're going to see in Africa. Because so many males are going to be taken away, women are going to have to take on roles that men once had. We also see the development of polygamy in parts of Africa, right? Marrying more than one man, because there's a limited amount of limited marrying more than one woman. Because there's a limited number of available spouses, so you see that as well. Also, you're taking the youngest men from these areas. When you're doing that, you're hurting their manufacturing industries. You're hurting their ability to move forward economically. You're hurting their political structure. You're really destroying a lot of the foundation of what Africa is, and it's because you're bringing so many males forward. You're taking so many males out. Remember also that the kingdom that they always talk about is the Congo, right? That was King Alphonse. Okay, so if you see King Alphonse, you know it's going to have something to do with the Atlantic slave trade, right? Because that was the original person that the Portuguese make the deal with, and the Spanish make the deal with to get Africans out of Africa. Okay, so King Alphonse. Let me see what's next. Holy crap. Okay, Atlantic slave trade, Middle Passage. Oh, triangle trade. Definitely know the triangle trade. Be aware of it. Again, what's going from where. We know that Europeans are going to be selling weapons and manufactured goods to Africa. Then they're going to be taking Africans out of Africa, bringing them to the New World, and then they're going to be bringing resources back from the New World over to Europe. So just be aware of that system of trade that's going to occur. All right. Nothing I want to point out to you before we get to European stuff. Because of all of this, the Western African kingdoms at this point and the trade routes, like the Trans-Saharan Trade Network, specifically the Trans-Saharan Trade Network, basically come to an end. The Trans-Saharan Trade Network really kind of comes to an end at this point because everything is going to kind of be maritime trade, right? Everything is going to be trade that's going to go along the coast. So we see an end really to those great Western kingdoms. Like, right, it goes from the Mali to the Songhai, and the Songhai is basically the last of the great Western African kingdoms. Okay? Okay. Good with Africa. We understand slavery. We understand how it works. All right. Atlantic slave trade, good. All right, so let's go back to Europe. Okay. Process. People all need it. I'm still going, so. Whatever. All right, guys, there's all empty chairs if anybody wants to sit. Okay, so at this point, after the Renaissance is over.
This is Rena's seat?
No.
It's warm.
That's impossible for me. Okay, you guys ready? All right. Wow, 3:30. Everybody rocks. Okay, I like it. Okay, so now when we get into some of the European history stuff, this will be quick. One of the things that happens as a result of the Renaissance is this idea of questioning the Catholic Church. So we're now we're away from the age of exploration and the conquest of the Americas. Now we're going back to Europe. Some things you got to know is that within Europe itself, we're seeing some transition during this time period. Religiously, the big change is the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation is the fragmentation of the Christian church. When we look at the Protestant Reformation, we're looking at the fragmentation of the Christian church. Okay? Remember, Protestant Reformation begins in Northern Europe. okay, in Germany specifically. And we know that the guy who basically starts the Protestant Reformation is Martin Luther, right? And out of the Protestant Reformation is going to come many different sects. You're going to have, we talked about in class, you got Lutheranism, you got Calvinism, you got Anglicanism, you got Presbyterians, you got Methodists, you got Anabaptists, you got all those different groups. All it means is they're all Christian, but they don't necessarily follow the Pope. Okay? The Pope is Catholic. So what the Protestant Reformation does is the Protestant Reformation is basically a change from that religious hierarchy that we've talked about for so long that has really kind of been corrupt and screwed up. And they're going to change to a more pure way of looking at God, right? A more direct route to God. All right? Does that make sense? You don't have to go crazy with the details of the Protestant Reformation. But the one thing that I always talk about is with the Protestant Reformation is that Protestantism lends itself to capitalism. Protestants have there's something called the Protestant work ethic. And it has to do with this idea predominantly of Calvinism. We talked about the elect and those people that are kind of like telling the other people within the faith what to do. What we see is we tend to see in Protestant areas, we see more of a devotion to capitalism. We see more elements of democracy, right? And we see not really missionary work, right? They're not like the Jesuits who are going around and trying to spread Catholicism. They're more worried about making money. And they're not really worried about conversion. So places where we see Protestantism, big time, are the Germanic states, the Netherlands, and England. And half. Okay? The Netherlands, England, Germany, and kind of France. That's where we see Protestantism. Where we see Catholicism, we see in places like Spain, Italy, Austria. That's where the Catholics are.
Why are Protestants Catholics?
Just told you.
Makes me an idiot.
Protestants are considered to be Protestant areas. So when you look at Calvinism, the whole idea is that there's this idea of predestination where God has preordained who is going to go to heaven or hell. And what Calvinism calls for is this idea of a group called the elect. And the elect are the people that are going to heaven. What essentially happened in Protestant societies that had Calvinism was that those elect tend to be the wealthiest. So that everybody else in society wants to be a member of the elect. They're going to go out and make money. So there's a work ethic that's associated with it. That's why it kind of comes with capitalism. Good. All right, so that's kind of what it is. Also, within Catholicism, you're usually talking about a monarch that you're going out and earning money for. And there's that kind of ideal. So Protestant's going to change that thing. Now, one of the things that comes from Protestantism is that you're going to have a couple of things. And you don't really need to know a lot, but one of these things is you're going to have something called the 30 Years' War, which we're not going to go into any detail about. You don't really need to know it. But at the end of the 30 Years' War, what essentially comes to an end is the Holy Roman Empire. The Holy Roman Empire, for all intents and purposes, comes to an end. And this is, by the way, sorry, I got to give you a frame of reference. This is the 1500s. So like 1517 is when Luther does his 95 Theses. So during the 1500s, you have an end to the Holy Roman Empire, and what you essentially have is now you have the rise of these monarchs who are consolidating their authority even more. So during after the 30 Years' War, which is in 1648, you have the rise of what's called the absolutists, okay? The age of absolutism. So when we talk about age of absolutism, you have to mention things like divine right of kings, right? The belief that you get your power from God. Divine right of kings. The examples that you need to know are Louis XIV and Peter the Great. They're ruling around the same time, middle of the 1600s. And what they're going to do, these absolute monarchs, is they're going to centralize their authority behind their own administrations. They're going to set up bureaucracies or levels of government where they're going to have control over their whole kingdom. And it's going to be based on this idea of getting power from God. So a few things are going to happen here. Okay, and you're going to look at your notes on this, on absolutism, but a couple of things that I want you to be aware of. In all cases, they have to control the nobility. Okay? In all cases of absolutism, they have to continue to control the nobility. They also must try to control minority groups within their kingdoms. So like Louis XIV goes after the Protestants. Peter the Great goes after the Cossacks. Okay? They're groups that are considered modern minority groups. They also, something that they like to ask about the AP, they like to talk about architecture. Remember, both of these monarchs built castles or kingdoms, palaces, that's a better word, palaces to demonstrate their strength. Louis XIV builds the Palace of Versailles. Peter the Great builds St. Petersburg. So they go to war, they control the nobility, they control minority groups, and they build large palaces to demonstrate their strength. But it's all about consolidation of power, consolidation of authority. Because now what you're seeing is essentially the formation of nation states, or like the formation of what will eventually be nation states in Europe. At the same time as the age of absolutism, you're also seeing constitutionalism. Same idea. But instead of a monarch being the central figure in the government, it's a constitution that is a central figure in the government. In other words, everything, when it's an absolute monarch, the king makes all decisions. Decisions often are arbitrary, they're not good for the people. When you're talking about constitutionalism, the Constitution is the law of the land. The best place to see that is in England as a result of the Glorious Revolution. Okay, that's at the end of the English Civil War. So constitutionalism and absolutism do the same thing. They centralize authority, but they do it in two different ways. Absolutism, it's about a monarch. Constitutionalism, it's about a piece of paper. Okay? You're going to see constitutionalism more where they're Protestant, and you're going to see absolutism more near Catholic countries.
What's a constitutional monarch?
Constitutional monarchy is a monarchy in which the Constitution has more power than it. In other words, the monarch has to be loyal to the Constitution. All right. That leads us to the scientific revolution, which I think is going to be, nope, we got a couple more things. Scientific revolution, all right. Around this time, during the 1500s, in addition to the changes in religion, right, so let's go back to it, sorry. So in Europe, during this time period, we see a few things. One, we see politically centralization of authority with new monarchs, absolutism, and constitutionalism. We see a fragmentation of the church. We see, right, that's the Protestant Reformation, where you see the formation of these new religious groups. In terms of advances and innovations, the scientific revolution, right? Renaissance to the scientific revolution. Remember what the scientific revolution does, right? It's going to cause advances in science and math. The big thing, though, the big picture of the scientific revolution is historically important for these three reasons. It laid a basis for a modern view of the world as a rational, ordered place. It shifted the nature of discourse and natural philosophy from reason to empirical method, and then finally it affected the thinking of a wide range of people, from poets and philosophers. Nobody cares about that. But the church continues to lose authority because of the scientific revolution, right? You know, religious people worry about certain things, but they don't care that NASA goes to the moon, right? That's a big deal, because you're going to the heavens. What the scientific revolution does, and science always does this, it disproves religious philosophy.
Heliocentric model.
Yes. So during the scientific revolution, we see the development of the heliocentric model. We see the development of new math. We see all of these things, especially on a worldly basis. We see that the heavens are not the heavens, they're actually just space. So the scientific revolution is going to be very important. Now, what you need to know is that the scientific revolution is going to lead to the Enlightenment. So the scientific revolution is an extension of the Renaissance because we're talking about learning. The scientific revolution is now investigating how the world works, right? This is how the world and the universe works. That's what the scientific revolution is doing. When we get to the Enlightenment is saying this is how the government should work. Okay? Same idea. You're going to use research. You're going to use investigation. Same idea. Okay? All right, scientific revolution. All right, last thing. Early industrial Europe. So, economically, Europe is changing as well. At this point in time, we are seeing the development of early capitalism and early industrialization. So what's starting to happen in Europe, as all of these resources are coming in from the New World, you're now seeing the development of early manufacturing and by way of the putting out system, but also known as the cottage industry. Okay? And we talked about this in class. The cottage industry was this idea of, all right, Dave is a merchant. He is bringing in resources he's bringing cotton from the Americas. Okay? He's bringing cotton from the Americas. That cotton is then given to a peasant family. That peasant family is now sitting in their house, I guess, and they're now making cloth. They're then giving it back to Dave, and Dave is now setting it out on the market. And he's selling it for his own profit. That's capitalism. This is the early industrial period, right? Because now what you're doing is you're creating a system where you're now individuals are going out and selling crap. Does that make sense? That's capitalism, right? Where individuals are going to be going out and making money for themselves. And this is a very early stage of the Industrial Revolution. Because what this does, guys, if you think about it, it changes everything. Because now you're going to have villages that are going to set up that are going to be like markets. So you're going to get people coming together. Peasants are now going to have to they're not going to have to starve to death during the winter because they don't have any money because they now have jobs during the winter. You have families working together. The whole economic system is changing, and people now have an interest in going out and making money for themselves. And that's the root of what the Industrial Revolution is. So this is the precursor to the Industrial Revolution. So this is happening during the 1600s and 1700s.
Me too.
And we'll get to this stuff. Tokugawa and crap on. That's weird, Brendan. We'll do that. All right, guys. That's gonna be it.
Why did that